The Rothschilds are probably the most famous wealthy family in history. But there was a man who was richer, more powerful, and so far ahead of his time that modern banking, global finance, and even political lobbying can be traced back to decisions he made in a small German city over 500 years ago. His name was Jacob Fugger, and the fact that you've probably never heard of him is exactly why you need to watch this. Welcome back to the channel where we uncover history's greatest wealth builders and extract the lessons that still work today. Let's get into it. Augsburg, Germany. A textile merchant family called the Fuggers have been doing reasonably well for themselves. Comfortable, respected, but not extraordinary. The Fuggers have been doing reasonably well for a generation. Comfortable, respected, but not extraordinary. In that era, the eldest sons inherited everything. The younger ones were expected to join the church or make their own way. So at 13 years old, Jacob was sent to Venice, the financial capital of the world at that time, to learn the textile trade. But Jacob didn't just learn textiles in Venice, he learned banking. He studied the sophisticated financial instruments Italian merchants were using, double-entry bookkeeping, letters of credit, tools that barely existed in Germany. He studiously learned Italian banking tools, letters of credit, and double-entry bookkeeping, tools that became the foundation of his greatest private fortune. He came home with knowledge nobody around him had. That gap in knowledge became the foundation of the greatest private fortune the world has ever seen. He came home to Augsburg with knowledge nobody around him had. And that gap in knowledge became the foundation of the greatest private fortune the world has ever seen. The lesson is immediate and powerful. Jacob didn't just learn his industry, he went to where the most sophisticated version of his industry existed and absorbed everything. He invested in his own financial education before he invested in anything else. He pivoted from textiles into mining. His family thought he was gambling with everything they had built. Jacob didn't care. He saw what the Habsburgs needed. Mining was considered risky, dirty, unpredictable. Banking was considered morally questionable. The church had complicated views on it. He lent the Habsburgs enormous sums. In exchange, he received rights to silver and copper mines across Central Europe that produced wealth for decades. Jacob lent the Habsburgs enormous sums of money. In exchange, he received rights to silver and copper mines across Central Europe, mines that would produce staggering wealth for decades. He structured the deal so repayment came in the form of assets that would keep producing wealth long after the transaction was done. He traded cash, which gets spent, for ownership of productive assets. Cash flow from assets beats a one-time payday every single time. At one point, historians estimate he controlled nearly 80% of Europe's copper supply. Copper was not optional. It was used in weapons, coins, and construction. Whoever controlled copper controlled an essential resource of civilization. He used this leverage masterfully. When the Pope needed money to build St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Jacob Fugger financed it. When Charles V needed to essentially buy votes to become Holy Roman Emperor in one of the most consequential elections, Jacob Fugger financed that too. And he kept receipts. There is an actual letter that survives from Jacob to Charles V that is one of the most remarkable documents in financial history. Jacob reminds the emperor that he would not be sitting on his throne without Fugger money. A private citizen writing to the ruler of the Western world. That is leverage. A private citizen writing to the most powerful ruler in the Western world demanding repayment. That is the kind of leverage that only comes from being genuinely indispensable. He positioned himself so that the most powerful people in the world needed him more than he needed them. He made himself impossible to ignore. He was ruthless. He crushed competitors, manipulated markets, and used political influence in ways that would be called corruption today. He built the Fuggerei in Augsburg in 1516, the world's first social housing complex. That community still exists today. He understood something that many wealthy people miss. Generosity strategically deployed builds social goodwill that protects wealth. The community loved him. He understood something that many wealthy people miss. Generosity strategically deployed builds social goodwill that protects wealth. The community loved him. That love was a form of insurance. He also kept meticulous financial records at a time when most merchants were still operating on handshakes. He knew his numbers intimately. He could tell you his net worth to the last gold coin at any moment. He also kept meticulous financial records. He knew his numbers intimately. You cannot manage what you do not measure. When Jakob Fugger died in 1525, his estate was worth nearly $400 billion today, comfortably ahead of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. He left no children. Within 2 generations, the Fugger empire had largely collapsed. Wealth built on one exceptional person is fragile. Wealth built on principles, systems, and trained successors is durable. The Rockefellers understood this. Jakob Fugger did not solve that final problem. Jakob Fugger started as the 7th son with no inheritance and died as the wealthiest private individual in recorded history. Every single one of those principles is available to you right now. The only difference between you and Jakob Fugger isn't access to copper mines or Habsburg emperors. It's whether you're willing to study, pivot, and position yourself where the real leverage is. The only difference between you and Jakob Fugger is whether you're willing to study, pivot, and position yourself where the real leverage is. Subscribe for more. If this video gave you something to think about, subscribe. Next week, we go into another forgotten wealth story. See you then.